A sultry night in Paris. A tunnel, a car, a princess, and seconds later, the most deafening silence in modern history. For decades, the world accepted a convenient version. A car crash caused by a drunk driver fleeing paparazzi. What if the tragedy in the Alma tunnel wasn't an accident, but the final act of a meticulously planned operation? What if the true mastermind behind Diana's death was never in hiding, just ignored, always present in reports, among the mourners, but never questioned? This investigation begins with a document never filed publicly. An anonymous tip delivered it to a British journalist in 2004, dated 1996, months before Diana's death. It contained one chilling phrase: permanent mitigation of symbolic threats. To the elite, Diana had become exactly that, a charismatic symbol who eclipsed the crown and exposed its fractures. Not just an ex-princess, a threat. Then came the anomaly, a name buried in Scotland Yard reports, tied to royal security, cross-referenced with MI6 records. It reappears, an unofficial collaborator with the Critical Asset Maintenance Division. But why would intelligence be monitoring Diana? Officially, she was no longer a royal. So what justified the covert surveillance? This man, now in his 70s, lives in quiet seclusion. No interviews, no testimonies. But in 1997, he was in Paris. Classified documents place him at a high-level meeting with the Ministry of Defense 2 days before Diana's death. That same week, sources confirm a rare red protocol was activated, used only in cases of serious threat to the monarchy's image. When you hear his name, without titles, yet directly linked to the royal inner circle, you'll understand why no one dares to say it. If you want this truth to reach more people, leave your like now. The truth has been hiding in plain sight all along. A few months before the Paris tunnel tragedy, Diana already knew. She felt it. She feared it. Friends later revealed she was convinced something was terribly wrong. She believed she was being followed, watched, that her phones were tapped, that her brakes could be sabotaged. At the time, it sounded paranoid. Today, it feels like a desperate cry for help. Ignored. Around that same time, a document surfaced, one that could change everything. A confidential memo, stamped with a high-level seal, was never made public, but quietly circulated among a few journalists and former intelligence agents. It described a closed-door meeting in London, just 3 months before Diana's death. Attendees, senior royals, a former MI6 director, and most notably, one of the most discreet and powerful men in the British power structure. The document outlined emergency actions to contain royal image damage. But the chilling phrase was in the footer. Procedure 7A, discreet neutralization of symbolic threat. And that threat was Diana. Sources close to intelligence confirmed. Neutralization is never used casually, especially in crown protection protocols. Even more alarming, the memo references financial transfers to a Cayman Islands account shortly after the meeting, linked to a shell company used in covert operations. At the bottom, a faded signature, blurred, but through forensic imaging, experts identified the likely author, a direct advisor to Queen Elizabeth II, someone long considered untouchable. He quietly retired at the end of 1997. No announcement, no farewell, just silence. His name could be the centerpiece of the entire cover-up. With access to the Queen and Prime Minister, he was known behind the scenes as a silent mediator. But why would he appear in documents tied to offshore funds and terms like neutralization? The connection between this memo and Diana's final night may be more direct than anyone imagined. Before revealing the name that could shake the British monarchy to its core, we must return to that night in Paris and look closely at one overlooked detail, possibly the reason Diana never had a chance to escape. For you to continue following this investigation and not miss anything we are about to reveal, subscribe now. The accident happened at 0:23 a.m. in the Pont de Tunnel, Paris. For security analysts and experts in occult history, that location has always been peculiar, silent, dark, and most of all, no surveillance cameras inside the tunnel, an odd absence for European standards in 1997. But there's something even more disturbing. The tunnel sits atop an ancient pagan route, once used in sacrificial rituals to the goddess Diana the Hunter. Coincidence? According to a former French intelligence agent, later interviewed anonymously, the Alma Tunnel was known internally as a tactical blind spot, ideal for permanent operations without witnesses. And that night, everything aligned. A last-minute convoy, a replacement driver reportedly drunk, though his blood alcohol level remains disputed, and paparazzi conveniently positioned at just the right time. But one detail remains buried beneath layers of diplomatic silence. At 0:18, just 5 minutes before the crash, a call was made from an iconic, restricted number in the UK, tied to one of its most powerful government offices. The call lasted exactly 46 seconds and connected to a French line later traced to a covert surveillance cell operating in Western Europe. Why would someone with that level of influence place a call, at that moment, to that number? This information was never made public. It surfaced only because a French telecom employee discovered it within encrypted call records. Before he was dismissed under a lifetime gag order, he copied the file and later shared it with British journalists. What he revealed was clear. Someone gave an order that night. What do you think? Was this just a tragic accident? Leave your comment. But the real question isn't who made the call. The truly terrifying question is, what did Diana know? In her final weeks, she grew increasingly restless. She had begun compiling sensitive material, and after her death, it vanished. Diana was no longer just a princess. She had become a powerful symbol, a woman who had broken free from the royal mold and emerged as a political, media, and social force. In the months leading up to her death, she began assembling something few knew existed, a confidential dossier. Compiled in secret almost obsessively, it contained highly sensitive material that, according to sources close to her, could destroy reputations at the highest level. Letters exchanged with former royals, reports on covert military actions, suspicious financial documents, and even recordings from inside royal residences, all quietly guarded by Diana. She told trusted friends she was preparing to go public, to expose betrayals, political manipulations, connections to questionable regimes, and scandals capable of shaking international alliances. She was ready to speak. An explosive interview was being planned, and confidential reports, recovered years later, suggest that what she was about to reveal could have triggered an institutional earthquake. Among the many theories, two stand out. The first suggests Diana had proof of a secret scheme involving influence peddling between royal figures and foreign interests, where diplomatic favors were exchanged for large, concealed donations. If true, it would seriously damage the monarchy's claims of neutrality and moral authority. The second theory, even more explosive, involves a possible pregnancy. While rumors have long circulated about Diana expecting a child with Dodi Al-Fayed, few know that her personal diary mentioned an urgent medical appointment in London, just days before Paris. Was she about to confirm a royal heir of non-British, non-Christian descent? If so, it would have shattered the foundations of the House of Windsor. And for some, that was unthinkable. Many believe that what Diana knew, and what she was about to reveal, became her silent death sentence. She wasn't just an ex-wife. She was a threat to the system, a bomb ticking through the marble halls of power. If this revelation intrigued you, leave your like now. Your engagement keeps this investigation alive. But one question still haunts this story. Where is the dossier? It vanished after her death. No documents, no recordings, not even a trace. Or was it found and erased? Unconfirmed sources claim a British team landed in Paris the next morning. Officially, diplomatic support. Unofficially, they were the first to touch Diana's belongings. What were they really after? Because the man whose name may unlock this entire mystery has gone unnoticed. Until now, the accident was quick, brutal, relentless. But what if everything, the route, the car, the driver, even the absence of cameras, had already been meticulously planned long before that night? The pieces don't just fit together. They betray a carefully orchestrated plan. In the weeks leading up to August 31st, 1997, confidential documents, leaked years later, reveal that UK intelligence agencies were on operational alert regarding Princess Diana. The official justification was to protect sensitive diplomatic interests. But the content of these reports says something else. Surveillance, constant observation, communications monitoring, displacement tracking, a true invisible siege. But why? What did Diana represent at that moment that required such intense vigilance? According to an internal MI6 document, leaked by a former analyst who has since lived under a protected identity, there was an active monitoring protocol for Diana titled Operation Sentinel. This protocol listed the princess as a highly influential media risk factor with potential for institutional destabilization. And this assignment was marked as urgent. Exactly 19 days before the accident, the operation involved direct cooperation between MI6 and sectors of the French DGSE, with real-time exchange of information on the princess's every move. Diana was being surrounded, and the question that echoes is inevitable. Protect from what? Testimonies collected years later, during parallel investigations, reveal that British agents were, in fact, in Paris on the night of the accident. Not on an official mission, not in a diplomatic entourage. They were there discreetly, outside the formal records. One of them, identified only as MW in internal documents, he was a specialist in distraction and evasion operations, techniques generally used to cover up movements or create false narratives in external actions. Why would such an expert be in Paris? That night, in that city, when crossing data from diplomatic flights and confidential hotel records, another name stands out. An MI6 officer who, months after the tragedy, was transferred to an embassy in the Middle East, and 2 years later, presumed dead under circumstances that have never been clarified. Officially, a domestic accident. If you want to continue following this investigation until the end, with each connection revealed, each name exposed, and each layer of silence dismantled, subscribe now. The question that begins to form at this point in the investigation is even more disturbing. What if the accident was not just planned, but executed with the active collaboration of agents who swore to protect the state? What if, to protect the Crown's darkest secrets, someone decided Diana needed to disappear? Names involved in this operation began to disappear from the British institutional map. They left the scene. They resigned. They died. Or they were simply erased from public records. What if I told you that one of the main people involved in this case ended up mysteriously silenced? Someone who could perhaps confirm, with just one sentence, who gave the order. Whenever someone gets too close to the truth, something happens. A phone call, an accident, a disappearance. And with Diana's death, this was no different. From the first minute after the accident in the Alma Tunnel, a dark pattern began to form behind the scenes of the investigation. Witnesses disappearing, documents being erased, and people close to the princess silenced in ways that were as discreet as they were definitive. Among the most mysterious figures in this plot is James N. Anson, the French photographer who owns the infamous white Fiat Uno, seen leaving the tunnel at the exact moment of the accident. That car was never found, and Ananson, despite numerous contradictions in his testimony, was never pressured by authorities. Years later, he was found dead inside his car, charred, with signs of an alleged suicide. But the detail that escapes logic is that the body was found locked inside, even with highly suspicious signs of combustion. Independent experts say the conditions at the scene indicated a carefully constructed act. What's more, Ananson was known to have direct contacts with European intelligence agencies. Could he have been eliminated for knowing too much? Another name that resonates with uneasiness is that of David Shaler, former MI5 agent. Shaler caused a stir by exposing, in interviews and public documents, the existence of secret plans by the British intelligence service involving political assassinations. Among them, an operation in which the target would be a foreign leader, using techniques similar to those applied in the Diana case. Manipulation of vehicles, creation of distractions, and neutralization with the appearance of an accident. Shaler was arrested, prosecuted, and publicly ridiculed. His image was destroyed, but he never denied a single word of what he revealed. On the contrary, the more he was pressed, the more he asserted that the truth about Diana was still hidden beneath layers of loyalty and fear. And it wasn't just public figures. People close to Diana, such as former assistants, personal employees, and even nurses who treated her after the accident, reported receiving veiled threats. Some disappeared from public life completely. Others, according to unofficial reports, were coerced into signing confidentiality agreements with extreme clauses. At this point in the story, one thing becomes clear. Whoever dared to speak out paid the price. But what if all of this was being done to protect a single person? Someone with enough power to move secret agencies, erase evidence, manipulate investigations, and disappear with official documents. A name that has always circulated on the edges of this mystery. Never directly accused, never formally interrogated. We come to the most dangerous question of this investigation. Who really benefited from Diana's death? Who had enough power, enough influence to articulate something so meticulous, silent, and devastating without ever leaving any obvious traces? For decades, the official narrative diverted public opinion's attention to calculated distractions, uncontrolled paparazzi, drunk drivers, lunatic theories, and incoherent versions. But as hidden documents emerge, witnesses are silenced, and subterranean links between the monarchy and secret agencies are exposed. A figure begins to emerge from the shadows, not because it was hidden, but because it was exactly where no one dared to look. After all, sometimes the safest hiding place is the most visible. This person is not a stranger to the royal family. On the contrary, he is someone deeply rooted in its structures, with unrestricted access to the most sensitive behind the scenes of the monarchy, direct connections with intelligence sectors, and influence over state decisions. And more than that, someone whose position only strengthened after Diana's death. Do you know who it is by now? Put it below in the comments. I want to know your opinion. The evidence is not just circumstantial. They are printed in reports that mention strategic meetings with members of MI6. They appear in financial transactions linked to offshore accounts identified as part of institutional image management schemes. And they become even more glaring when we cross-reference data from Operation Sentinel, the phone calls that fateful night, and the names that mysteriously disappeared in the following months. And then, something jumps out. This figure was connected to all these fronts, not as an explicit protagonist, but as the hidden constant, the silent link between the documents, the silences, the unsigned orders, and the institutional silence that followed. For legal and ethical reasons, we cannot accuse directly, but the elements point strongly to someone whose public image is immaculate, almost sacred, and whose power has remained untouchable over the years. Someone whose rise to protagonism within royalty occurred exactly after the elimination of her biggest obstacle, Diana. And here is the most disturbing revelation of all. Internal sources claim that this name had already been raised in classified investigations within MI5, but that the reports were immediately classified as threats to national security. What would it be about a simple investigation into an accidental death that could threaten the security of an entire country? If you want to discover the whole truth and understand why this name could be the final piece of this macabre puzzle, subscribe now. There's still a lot to be revealed. So far, we've followed every clue left behind. But what if we're looking in the wrong direction? What if the figure who has gone unnoticed all these years is not just a hidden suspect, but rather the true architect behind it all? The connection between the monarchy, the secret services, and Diana's mysterious death seems clear. But there is one piece of the puzzle that almost no one has dared to analyze in depth. A constant presence, absolutely strategic. He's not an intelligence officer, not a member of the media, and he's not a stranger. This is someone who was part of Diana's inner circle, someone who was close enough to know her fears, her plans, and most of all, what she was about to reveal. For years, this name was protected by an aura of loyalty. It was never officially mentioned in the investigations. He was never invited to testify in depth, and he always remained silent. But new evidence, coming from recently declassified files in France, places this person at the center of a strategic move made days before Diana's death. A ticket, handwritten, with a date, a location, and a sentence that freezes the blood. The problem will be resolved before next week. The note was identified inside a records folder belonging to the British consulate in Paris. It had never been catalogued. It had never been included in the official dossiers. And the handwriting, according to experts, corresponds with 98% accuracy to that of a known figure around the princess. Someone who was always protective but who had reasons to want silence. Someone who, according to internal sources, maintained direct contact with high-ranking figures at Buckingham Palace. What does this ticket mean? And why was it hidden for so long? If this revelation is true, it completely changes the timeline of the tragedy. We are no longer just talking about collusion. We are talking about internal complicity, and that raises a question that echoes like a bomb about to explode. What is really being protected? When the monarchy insists on closing this chapter as a simple accident, because if this name is finally revealed, if the connections are proven, we are not just looking at a scandal. We are facing a possible institutional rupture, capable of shaking not only history, but the very future of the British monarchy. Click now on the video that is appearing on your screen, and prepare to be shocked by the truth that the monarchy never wanted you to know.